Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking specifically about the regulator on the Hunter SHA military multi-fuel heater, space heater. SHA stands for Space Heater Arctic. Um, these regulators are what feeds fuel at a proper rate to the burner um, to keep things from getting out of control, um, or getting too hot or too cold or whatever. Allows you the heat control, lets you to adjust things like that. So I'll walk through how this thing works and then how to potentially service it if you're having issues with it. So to start the burner, we turn the valve on the top here to on. Then we crank the heat to high, pour a little bit of diesel into the bottom of the burner with a bit of paper towel or toilet paper or Kleenex or whatever, light it, and then the flame heats the fuel in the bottom of the burner. It starts to take off. Once the heat starts to rise, you dial this thing back to a comfortable level. And then when you're ready to turn it off, it gets shut off to the on off position. It stops flow altogether, and you let it cool down, pack it up, and go on your merry way. So I've already taken the screws out of this. So I'm just going to take this off the top. There was a gasket in here, so I've just left it out for demonstration purposes here, but be careful not to mess up that gasket. And you'll see right away inside that there's a float, very much like a regular, gasoline carburetor. It works on the same principle. Now, underneath this float here, just like a normal carburetor, there is like a needle valve that, as this float rises to the set level that it's supposed to be at, when it gets there, that needle gets pushed down, closes the valve, stops fuel from flowing in. And that's designed like that on purpose because the fuel needs to sit right about here in this bowl. If it goes any higher, it raises too high in the up tube in the burner and can flow into the bottom of the burner bowl, and then you're got a runaway fire, which threatens to burn everything around you to the ground. So this is highly important, and I'll go through the bit of safety in here as well. Right here, you can see this little port right here. That flows out and then out this little nipple here, which is supposed to be connected to a hose that runs outside of your tent or shelter or whatever you're in. That's because if this valve were to, say, stick in this down position and leave this open, fuel would be allowed to rise to a certain point. It will get to the top of this and be allowed to flow out and away. And that's why it's important that this hose runs away from the fire outside to a place where, it's not going to light a blaze and burn you to the ground. That is the safety mechanism. If you are familiar with any of the old house burner oil, fuel oil furnaces, they have a regulator similar to this where, as fluid comes up, it shuts the fuel off. If it's allowed to go beyond a certain place, there's usually a secondary float that will hit a spring release valve that slams shut and shuts the fuel off altogether. This does not have that. This just has that overflow dump to get rid of it, so it can't come out the top of this regulator and spill all over the ground inside your tent. That's why that hose needs to be hooked up. Okay, so we'll take this float out of here. Now, when you take the float out, there's a little pin in here, so be careful not to lose that. I would take it out right away and set it aside so it does not jump and get lost, because these parts either are non-existent or extremely hard to find. So, I mean, I read somewhere that they're not supposed to be serviceable. I believe the military, when they run these things, if they have issues and they can't just fix them by taking it apart and tinkering inside, they toss them and replace them altogether. Okay, so this is the bottom, or where the top of the float goes and pushes down when it floats up onto this needle seat here. That is a little rubber seat at the bottom that shuts the valve off when it's pressed down inside of that hole. The spring lifts it back up and allows diesel or kerosene or whatever to flow. And now we're looking down into the main inlet where your main hose comes in here and into this chamber. On the back end, this cap can be removed to expose a screen. Now that screen is important, and I'm going to talk about that in troubleshooting here right away. Okay, so it flows into this chamber through that screen. If you can see, there's a hole in the top, and that's where it flows in through where that needle was either opening or closing fuel in. Then it flows out here to the burner. I can see right through that hole to the other side. Now when we look at the valve, you can see that little notched piece fits in where that pin is kind of sticking out inside of there. And as we turn the valve from low, where we're at now, watch this right here. As I move higher in temperature, that gets pulled up until you reach the max, and then it slams back down to the low position. So it's not allowed to go any higher than right up there. So as this raises, it opens the orifice and allows more and more liquid fuel to flow into the burner. The float allows it only to go to a certain elevation because that's the design of the burner. And I'll do a separate video about how that burner actually works. But when that's sitting in there like that, down through the vertical hole here, you can see how as I turn it up in temperature, that basically is opening the valve more and more and more, letting more fuel through faster to a maximum, and then drops back down to the low position. There is the adjustment for temperature here. Pull the plug and rotate it around to this position. If you are in temperatures below minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's warmer than that, you're allowing more flow. So you're taking a risk by allowing a lot more fuel to flow than should be allowed going into the burner. So this is the outside temperature, and it's there because as your fuel outside, it should be stored outside, it gets colder, it starts to thicken up, it flows a little bit less readily, and so you need to adjust that to allow more fuel in. Most of the time, you're probably going to be running in this position over here. Okay, troubleshooting. This is very simple. It's pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot that can go wrong with this. There's no rubber seats on any of this. So it's just the valve that opens and closes. If your fuel regulator, or let's say your stove, is not burning at all, or it starts and then goes out, you probably have a restriction in flow somewhere. First place to check would be the hose coming from your jerry can or your fuel source, and open up the petcock near the stove that you use to fill the tin cup to prime the burner. If you have fuel flowing through that valve readily, then it's likely not a problem with the jerry can or the fuel source end or the hose itself. You might have an airlock. That's going to eliminate whether or not there's an airlock in your hose. So if you're getting fuel to the regulator, then it's something inside the regulator. First place I would look is this thing. Pull that out, check, make sure it's not gummed up and plugged and full of crap, and clean it off if it is, and then put it back in and try again. Okay, so we'll put that back in now. The next thing that you might have an issue with is the float itself is sticking, and it's stuck in the down position, leaving that valve wide open, or it's stuck in the up position, leaving the valve closed. Okay, so if it's getting really, really hot, well, no, that's not correct, because the temperature control valve would keep the temperature regulated. But if you can't seem to shut it off, it might be your float is stuck up. Pretty unlikely, stuck down. What I have seen is that it's not letting fuel through, and it could be the float itself. Again, pretty unlikely. There's not much for this thing to get stuck on, and the buoyancy is probably more than enough to overcome any little bit of stickiness that might be in there, but who knows? It could be the float. More likely, it's this seat here being stuck because that rubber bit on the end This one, in fact, was a little bit stuck when I opened it up. The spring that goes on here is in good shape, and now it's free. You can see that it's working properly. But when I opened it up, this was stuck in the down position, and it actually had to be forced loose to open up that valve and allow fuel to flow in here. Now, this one was sitting dry. That's probably why it got stuck. If you're using this thing regularly, it's getting lubricated regularly, it's probably not going to get stuck. But if it sat, dry over a summer or something like that, and it's all of a sudden not working, that could be your problem right there. And then there is no other real rubber seats or anything in here. There is a rubber seal on the bottom of this, but there should be no reason to mess around with that. These things, like I said, are super basic, super simple. They're not that complicated. The only emergency backup is if this thing all fails and sticks open, that fuel dumps out over and out the hose there. So again, make sure that you always have that hooked up. There's really not much else that can go wrong with these things. If I ever run into a situation where it is something else, I'll make sure to let everybody know. But if you're not getting fuel to the burner, check the screen. Before you open this up and check that needle, give it a tap with a wrench or something, give it a shake. You might just free things up just by doing that. If it's still not working, then crack it open. See if that thing's moving. Maybe give it a little bit of, lube it up with a little bit of diesel just to get that seal wet. And then you should be good. So hope you enjoyed. Hope this helped anybody who's having any issues with these or is familiar with these. Like, subscribe. I'll be putting some more videos about the rest of the heater and its functioning, any troubleshooting with the rest of the heater. And hope you enjoyed.